Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to, or good morning, actually.
Yeah, good morning, yeah.
Time, I was
You got up.
way too late last night.
Michael.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. Good to be here. My name is Mike O'Brien, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel around free speech and economic mobility. It's a fantastic question. Do economic barriers silence voices or drive new opportunities for discussion and debate? But before we jump into a quick introduction of our panelists and some questions, during prep, came up that I should maybe do a little framing around the subject matter. So if you would bear with me for about a good minute and a half, I'll try to tie some of this together for us. So again, my name is Mike O'Brien. I'm the founder of something called the Wealth and Work Futures Lab at Drexel University, where our mission is to put humanity at the heart of economic policy and practice. We do believe that is a systems-based change management process. Capitalism is not built, unfortunately, to center humans and humanity and the sciences around what helps us flourish, heal, recover, and be our best selves as individuals or collectives. And so in that world of our work, when we think about economic mobility, we like to think about it through the lens of what allows for people to improve their financial and social well-being over time, both within their own lifetime and across generations. We believe it's about whether someone can change their circumstances through work, education, an opportunity, but more importantly, whether the systems around them make that possibility even an option. So mobility is about moving up, but it's not only about moving up, it's about actually being able to move at all, and particularly in a direction that is built for your health and well-being, or the health and well-being of collectives and families. So true mobility, in our opinion, depends on actually having a solid floor to stand on. So things like stable income, adequate income, housing, healthcare, childcare, and the ability to meet basic needs without crisis. Without that floor, people can't safely take risk, or it is very difficult to safely take risk. It is difficult to learn new skills that could aid you in your mobility, and it is very difficult sometimes just because of time economy and the consumption of how much of your day is consumed with trying to survive. It can become very difficult to participate fully in civic life. So at its core, economic mobility is about the freedom to pursue a future, not just to survive or scrape by in a present. This brings us to some work that over the last year has been moving through the country, I would say, in some cases illuminating new avenues of understanding and insight for some folks, and in other cases underscoring and amplifying experiences that people have spoken to for decades, some people maybe even centuries, and I think it's important we talk about that because we're in Philly. So Dr. Raj Chetty is the founder of Opportunity Insights at Harvard University, and his recent research last year in 2024 gave us a sobering picture. In the 40s, about 90% of children in the US grew up to earn more than their parents. For those born in the 1980s, like myself, born in 1985, proudly turned 40 this year, that number has fallen to 50%. Here in Philadelphia, we actually now rank last among the 50 largest metros in the United States. So in terms of upward mobility of the 50 largest cities in this country, we are last, meaning a child born into poverty here faces steeper odds of moving up almost more than anywhere else in the country. That's not just an economic problem, it's not just a civic problem, it's a design problem, and it's a core problem to our sense of shared humanity. So when people can't gain traction in the economy, they do lose bandwidth, they lose the confidence and the access to be heard. Often we tend to think people aren't speaking, but I actually question whether or not we're listening. Do we have the capacities to listen harder? Do we have the capacities to challenge our own narratives in the context of hearing information that might confront our own mental models and beliefs about the world? So economic instability can narrow participation, and when fewer voices are heard, our democracy does become thinner. So across this region, it is also important to point out that about 1 in 3 Philadelphians is literally not participating in the labor force at all. Our labor force participation rate is 65%. And while job growth has improved, too many of those jobs still don't offer, again, the wages or security that people need to build stable lives. So, as we begin today, I invite us to hold a central question to go along with the theme of the panel. What does it take to build an economy that not only rewards effort, but does protect dignity? One that gives every person the stability to dream, excuse me, and then pursue it? And what's it like to build an economy that shares the power to be seen and to be heard? That's the work ahead, friends. Building the floor and the ladder at the same time, nothing simple, but necessary. So with that, I'm thrilled to turn to our panel, leaders from both inside of Philadelphia and outside, who each approach these questions from a different angle based on their position in the work. But I do believe they all share a belief that economic design and human-centered design actually share some root. So I want to thank you for this opportunity again to moderate and share and frame. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. We have, I'm going to do this in order, Horace Ryans III, a success coach and graduate student here at Temple University. We have Darrin Anderson, the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Philadelphia. We have Claire Greenwood, executive director of the CEO Council for Growth and senior vice president of economic competitiveness at the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. And rounding us out is Keiser, strategic advisor at MediaLink. So please, let's give them a quick round of applause and a welcome. And Darrin, I would love to start with you. I know Darrin.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all the work that you all are doing here in the city, by the way, right? So Darrin, from your vantage point, leading the Urban League, how do you see the relationship between economic mobility and civic participation, both nationally and in Philadelphia?
Well, I think that's a loaded question, right? When you think about civic participation, civic engagement, and economic mobility, there's not a definition that everyone subscribed to. So one of the things I have learned, especially being a man of age, 50 years of age and intergenerationally, certain terminology that we use and that we lean towards doesn't have the same meaning. So you have to ask people the question, what does economic mobility means to you? But I can definitely point out what the barriers may be. And as the Urban League of Greater Philadelphia, there's a number of things that we're trying to do, right? We know that there's policies that are out there that are impacting people's ability to be able to obtain gainful wealth, or what we say family-sustaining wealth. We realize there's affordability issues that are out there, whether it's affordability to education. We got to talk about affordability to healthcare. We know that healthcare is a major problem, it's a major stepping stone towards people that do not have the resources to be able to get their medications, and among a few other things. And the advocacy work around the policy. There's policies right now that are creating more barrier. The CDFI fund has been eliminated, which will provide low-interest loans to small business owners and those that are creating micro-enterprises. The MBDA is gone, right? So if we don't make that connection to the policies that's being passed or being considered at the federal and state level, and what does that mean towards economic mobility, we're missing the boat.
Really quickly, just for anyone in the audience that might not know, MBDA, can you tell us what that is? So
the Minority Business Development, help me out. It's at the federal level. It was funding that was earmarked towards small business development for Black and brown and for women-owned businesses.
Thank you.
Yes.
Super important. So in your vantage point, and Horace, I'm gonna tee you up. We'll come back to you to talk about listening, but also people's ability to even engage in voicing, right? So Darrin, do you see that there are communities who are struggling in those areas, healthcare, childcare, adequate work, right? A lot of times it's like, oh, no one's working. And it's like, well,
that's not true. People can't live off of working 60 hours a week. What are you supposed to do at that point? Are you finding that there is a linkage when you're going out to do like the get out the vote supports, when you're going out to hear from people? Is there something in the space around public voice that is complicated for them in participation?
I mean, it really is. I mean, people did not get up and mobilize themselves civically during the last presidential election. There's a number of reasons. Hit strategies, where we've gained some of our data. They've done a number of community focus groups. And what young people, we're saying young people 35 and younger, said, look here, it doesn't matter who's president. You know, I've lived through 3 presidents. My life sucked. And if you can't tell me how to unsuck it, I'm not interested.
Right.
Right? So economically, those opportunities are not trickling down to real, tangible, touchable things that people can do to improve their lives. So rather than coming at them about why you didn't vote, because we hear that voting doesn't do anything for me, but guess what? It's doing something to you.
Right.
And we have to be able to have that conversation to make that connection. The conditions are different, the terminology is different. In addition to what his strategy mentioned, they said, hey, they asked the question, do you feel that race and gender is a barrier? And they said, well, we know that racism exists, but it doesn't stop us from obtaining opportunity. Our lexicon and our definition must change in how we're going to have this intergenerational conversation about wealth and wealth building.
So, great. Oh, yeah, please, Jordan.
There was also a Fed survey that was released, Alice survey in the spring, that really spoke to Philadelphians directly about what they were really seeking, and a better job was sort of the core answer for the most part of what individuals were saying was going to get them to think about their life and how their life might change. So I think there's something very tangible about the better opportunity in sort of all the contexts you're raising already.
And Alice, just for folks that are not familiar, it's a fantastic framing to help us better understand what does economic immobility or even downward mobility look like for folks. So ALICE is an acronym, stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. Because a ton of people are working, they do not have any benefits provided to them that allow them to acquire an asset, whether that benefit is that asset is directly supplied through the benefit, like an investment policy, could be a 401k, et cetera, some kind of retirement policy. And then you're also dealing with the benefits being able to support you getting to an asset. So it might not seed you one literally, but for example, the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia, famously for decades, would help their staff who are acquiring a home in West Philly with closing costs. They helped them finance the loan. I mean, there are all these benefits available to them to be able to acquire an asset. And so Alice looks at these variables in the lives of folks who are employed and to try to help better, again, tell these stories and understand what's happening. I just wanted to, no worries. Horace, and actually everyone, feel free to join in on any questions. Just give me a signal like Claire, thank you for leading the way there. Horace, so staying in the place around voice, so working directly with young adults, I'm sure you've seen structural barriers, policy-based barriers, also just like life barriers, right? On a regular basis. What are your students teaching you? And by default, what could they teach many of us in this room about what mobility really means to them today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I work for the Community College of Philadelphia within the Octavius Catto Scholarship. We specifically support students who may experience high rates of poverty. I have several students who are literally coming off of homelessness, right? I have students who are over the age of 40 who have never been to college before. But I also have students who are fresh 18 who are coming to college for the first time. And across the board, one of the main things that every single one of them tells me, or at least for the most part, is I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think most of the time when they're telling me these things, it's because first, they don't have, or they might not have many people in their life to show them what's supposed to be done. How do you navigate college? How do you become economically mobile? But I think the second part of that is no one has taken the time to listen to them. specifically talking about those life barriers, right? Like we can talk about like how to do school. I think everybody on our panel knows how to do school. The students I work with are spending their time every single day, not only trying to be economically mobile, trying to get their education, they're just trying to figure it out. And I think that's probably one of the hardest parts, not only being a young adult, but also being an adult. Guys, I don't know what I'm doing. But these students also are just super, super confused. And I guess to go back to your question about listening, some of these students, I'm going to say most of my students to make a generalization, just want to move up. And that is extremely hard. And I think for the entire lives, even for my entire life, education was the way to move up. But how do you move up when you have a child at home and you're sitting here in a community college classroom at 6 p.m., a 2-hour-long class, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., you have a kid at home. How do you move up? You go to your English class the next day. Your professor is telling you you have to write a 5-page paper about this topic that you care about, but you've been out of school for 15 years. How do you move up? How do you move up when you spend most of your time trying to understand the new math mechanics that have just dropped in 2025, and you still have to go home, figure out how you're going to raise your kid, how are you going to make your home, right? So my job at the end of the day is to listen, but then to also not use my place of privilege as a young person who went to college and all this stuff. My job isn't to tell you, well, here's how you do that. My job is then to listen to you, and at least let's work with what you got, right? And that's still tough, it's still hard. But again, every single day it's like, how do I help this young person or this older person just get through this next step? So I hope that answers the question.
It does. More to come. Yeah. So Claire, I would love to turn to you because I think it's the other side of the equation, right? We've got folks in need of work, folks who are employed looking to be upwardly mobile, and it can be very easy to be like, oh, the business community isn't doing anything. And it's I often say it's an interesting trap because on one end, you want a thriving business community. Because if we don't have the businesses, many people will not have access to the assets that I was just naming and we were talking about, right? But they'll be stuck in that space of being an Alice, right? The flip side is businesses are also starting to recognize, wait, we need, right? It's interesting, I'm gonna use a term that's become really hot button. People have thrown away the term DEI, but the latest research coming out to like Harvard Business Review, et cetera, is everybody's not abandoning the practices because they've actually been good for the bottom line.
Right,
it's been good for them as a business. So we're in this interesting spot where the narrative stinks, and Isaac, just prepping you up, I'm gonna come over there next, where the narrative around this whole thing is kind of stinky and people are shying away from it, but they're not necessarily shying away from the practice and trying to figure out how to dig in it further. And so Philly's at this interesting spot. So we're seeing this growing attention. I'm curious from your perspective, and this idea of linking business competitiveness with opportunity for people.
Yeah.
What does it take to build that kind of intentional region-wide approach to economic mobility? And where do you see some promising momentum here in southeastern Pennsylvania?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start by saying some of the data you were sharing earlier would be partnered on the Opportunity Insights ranking of Philadelphia, partnered with also a recognition that our region has grown at a slower rate in terms of job growth, even though we have seen some job growth, but sort of less than half of peers like Dallas and Atlanta. And so much of that growth has been slow, in particular in tradable or very export-intensive sectors, which is where you can actually generate more investment and economic activity that's coming from outside the market. And I think a lot of the opportunities, in particular, one analysis that the Brookings Institution did and just released in July suggested that low growth or lower than expected growth compared to national averages and peer averages cost this region over 100,000 jobs. And 70% of those jobs would have been opportunity-rich jobs. So positions where someone could be moving economically up where they had an opportunity for benefits and the proxies for a family sustaining floor, as you described it earlier. So I think there's that dynamic on a regional basis is an important one. I think that, at least in the work that we're trying to do, we're holding side by side with the importance of building a strategy to grow our region in a way that is thinking about inclusion and economic opportunity at its center. And that you really can't have one or the other, right? We can have, you can't really have you can have growth without economic inclusion, but you can't have economic inclusion without the growth. So I think knowing that we have to be able to do both things is really important. And you're going to get at some of the examples from other places. That dynamic is different here, I think, than in some of the models of other communities where we've seen efforts like this in past years. So I'll hold on the Charlotte model for a follow-up question.
Fair enough.
So first, this is really recognition that we need a really intentional strategy to grow opportunity. And how do we build that strategy by building trust and connection and practitioner relationships among not just organizations in Philadelphia, but across at least the southeastern Pennsylvania region. So those who are doing economic development in Delaware County and Chester County and Montgomery County, how do we build that approach together and not in like really tactics level strategy and approach. So the same market assessment also highlighted 3 sectors of opportunity where our region really already has some strengths, where we have some right to win, I think, with focus, but that also center opportunity-rich and a high concentration of opportunity-rich jobs. So we should really think about how we grow in our region, but not just growth for growth's sake, right? Let's grow where we know we can provide access and opportunity to residents. And the work that's happening now is really to build that kind of tactics level action plan. It's around biotech and life sciences. It's around technology companies that are really focused on kind of back-end enterprise solutions and around precision manufacturing. There's some details around machining and electronic components, but probably too in the weeds for this conversation. But the strategy is really going to be about both what are the things we need to do as a community to help grow those sectors, but also how do we pair a workforce and an intentional preparation strategy so that we can get people connected at scale as that sector grows. And there's, I think, a number of already existing partnerships around some of those sectors that I think are going to be a foundation for that, but that are really trying to think about, when we have more positions, how are we going to build the pathways and the structure for people to connect to those opportunities?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a fantastic moment for the city to have to think 20 years into the future, all the way back to like 5 years ago. Like, what if we would have, what could have? Yeah, it's a fascinating time. And narrative, I think, is going to play a huge role in that. To the earlier point of like, people define mobility based on their understandings of the world and their experiences and their lenses. And then there's the larger narrative that then gets broadcast, if you will, right, across regions, across the country even. And so Isaac, very curious about your thoughts here, because you do sit at the intersection of strategy, media, and culture. How do narratives about work and people related to work, whether that's poverty, or opportunity, how do these things shape public perception, and how might this influence the way policy or investments even seem possible?
Well, I think it's integral. I think the way, of course, policy, and there are a lot of other things that are very important when thinking about economic mobility, but I think the mindset and the psychology behind it is just as important. And I think what shapes the mindset that both policymakers and people of varying economic mobility, what shapes that is going to be the media and the culture and what you're seeing. I think we've seen like study after study that if you aren't able to see people in positions of power, whether that's in your everyday life or whether that's on TV, you're not going to be able to aspire to those same positions of power in the same way. So I think the way that we speak about people of varying economic mobility, both in the news and in the media, is going to be critical. And I think there are a lot of narratives right now that are doing a disservice and might be hurting the economic mobility. I think one that is discussed a lot is like demonizing the poor. I think we hear terms like welfare queen or other things that are going to paint people of lower economic statuses as lazy or that they're not working hard, and not talking about the institutional barriers that often led to where they're at. I think also at the same time, there are a lot of narratives. We've been moving away from this as much, but still a lot of narratives around like the white savior complex or like the rich savior complex. I think like a movie like The Blind Side is a very good example of that, where in order to be taken out of a low economic status, you need someone from a higher status to come and rescue that person. And I think one that's like not very accurate for most people's lived experience. But I think it also creates mindsets that someone who's of a low economic status can't like think for themselves or is not smart, and that someone who is from another economic status is going to be able to navigate a lot of these uncertainties and difficult situations that they're not typically privy to. So I think and then the last one that I wanted to highlight is a lot of these narratives around pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And I think a lot of people still think that that is a good narrative, and I'm not saying it always isn't, but I think our society, and especially the news, over-indexes on these stories of somebody who came from poverty and, you know, in an anomaly became really rich or transcend economic statuses. And I think while it's important to highlight those, I think those are an anomaly and those are a very minority of situations. And I think when we're thinking about stories to highlight, I think it's important to highlight what's actually going on. I think it was the Philadelphia Journal was doing this series with around 30 partner newsrooms called Broken Philly, that spoke to a lot of people in Philadelphia who were broke and hearing exactly what the narratives and like what their everyday life is. And I think broadcasting that to the general population is going to be the most effective way for people of higher economic statuses and people who are policymakers who can enact change, to understand and have a greater understanding that oftentimes it is an institutional or a structural problems that are leading to these economic divides. I think having that, and then also having people see in the news and in the media that they're not the only person going through that situation. I think having solidarity and seeing representation in varying different ways is critical. So I think when we're thinking about what we can do next and what we can do in the future, is I think the society has promoted a lot of more diverse people in the media. Like, I think the number of like female leads in movies has tripled in the last couple of decades. I think that is great, and that's like a trend that should definitely continue. But I think it's also important to highlight people, like everyday people, who are going through different struggles, who are going through different situations, because I think the stat was that like on American sitcoms, like 60 or 80% of the families are like middle class or middle income, but the reality is that's like less than 30%. So I think having the media and having the world, or the media, be more reflective of what's going on in everyday lives, I think is going to be more helpful for people in terms of economic mobility. But I think it's also there is also a business case for that. I think people like seeing people that they resonate with. So I think being able to marry those two is going to be a great way forward.
Thank you. No, fair, great points. Particularly like the narrative strategy thing. I appreciate you bringing up the welfare queen example. One of the moments that, as a designer, I thought was brilliant, but absolutely scary was when Newt Gingrich called Barack Obama the food stamp president. I said, wow, you just breathed so much life into the welfare queen narrative without having to reuse that language. It's not an old trope anymore. It became a new version of an old idea that extended itself out into a whole other generation. And I was like, whoa, yeah, we've got to step up our tactics and telling these other stories. So I just appreciated you totally lifting that up, because it's a great segue too towards this next half. If there's something you want to add,
can I add to that a little bit of that, Darrin? We have a number of program participants that come to our programs around entrepreneurship. We have small businesses. We have workforce development. We have a reentry program. And so the traditional jobs that have been made available, some are interested, some may not be interested. And and this notion around young people do not work is not real. They just want to work differently. They don't want to see themselves as a slave to a 9-to-5, and they still end up not having the economic mobility and the opportunity that they've seen on TV and in someone else's life, right? They want to have the ability to be flexible. They want to have the ability to take their ideas to scale. The other issue that we have here in the city as well, even some of the jobs that we have, even though they're skilled jobs, the attrition rate. So part of our reentry program, we have second chance organizations and companies and businesses, and yet 60 to 75% of when they hire from the city, there's an attrition rate that's associated with that. So keeping people to have jobs, so having pre and post job counseling, helping you to get the job. How do you maintain a job when you're working with someone that's not culturally relevant or culturally competent to be able to see eye to eye with you? Can we get along in order for us both to get along? Right?
And part of that cultural competence, is really quick, is the difference in generations, not just race and ethnicity. Right. I find that this is in the city like a hot button topic, and the nation. Right? We're all demonizing Gen Z, and I'm like, well, everybody, let's calm down.
Like, well, guys,
Hold on. That's what I mean, right?
Your question earlier about sort of employers and sort of, is this an either-or argument? I think there's some great examples, to your point, of employers, and I think one of the roles that we see for ourselves is to help support employers who are interested in learning about practice change, sort of along a continuum, right? There's apprenticeship PHL, which is I would say, kind of an exposure and educational series that really helps employers understand what is an apprenticeship, what would it look like to build that kind of program inside my organization. Who are examples of companies who are already doing this? What does that mean for them? What's the benefit of doing it? Through all the way to very structured cohort-based programs. You mentioned justice involvement, and so there's a fair chance hiring. We're going into cohort number 2 this year of a set of companies who want to learn together about what they have to do inside their own organization to be able to not only hire but retain employees who've had some involvement with the justice system. So I think that's another opportunity, that there's a lot of willingness and interest to think about practice change inside employers, but we kind of have to open the door to the conversation first. And
that's right.
Sometimes there's a tension in whose responsibility and what the expectations are that perhaps sometimes closes that conversation before you can start it. There's some great examples. Pico's doing some incredible stuff. They're creating an analyst apprenticeship program. They're doing all the work. They're filing the paperwork. They're going to the state to get it registered as an apprenticeship. They had 200 applications for 4 apprentice seats this year in their first set. And so how do we bring more employers to the table to learn from them and take that example and find places for those other 196 applicants in another organization.
Let's double click there and let's move to other spaces that are doing this. Like what you mentioned Charlotte in our prep call. Charlotte was, just for context, 50 out of 50 in the first study that Raj Chetty's folks did 10 years ago. And they've been doing some work. And so curious, you want to share any of that?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about Charlotte, which I would contrast with our region, is that Charlotte would have described themselves as booming. right? The business community and other civic stakeholders viewed like cranes are up everywhere, we have new employment happening, we're growing fast, and when that report was released, they were like, what? This tale of very different and two communities or experiences in the Charlotte community, I think was quite shocking. I think, fortunately or unfortunately, the Philadelphia region is very aware, I think, already of the challenge that is happening here, and we don't have the kind of growth that's happening, that was happening in Charlotte at the time. What they really focused on was building kind of momentum around this movement around opportunity. They built an organization called Leading on Opportunity that was, and I think still is, housed at the Foundation for the Carolinas. They raised an enormous amount of money. They really built a kind of a movement at scale. Their organization really focuses on sort of measuring progress, because you can't wait 10 years for Raja's next report to know how's it going. Are we moving the needle at all? So they built their Compass data dashboard. I think importantly, and maybe relevant to this conversation, they did that in a way that really centers community voice in the data. So the overall Compass index is weighted, the 4 or 5 factors are weighted as a function of what community says they need. So if we do more in early childhood education, or we do more in career exposure, the value of the success on any of those measures is really a function of like individuals and communities who say we need more early childhood education or career exposure, just as 2 examples. So I think they're really thinking about how to measure and build a movement and momentum. They really are able to do that at scale, and they're doing it in a way that brings philanthropic dollars together to co-invest in solutions, which I think is really important and something we can learn from here. And they really have been very intentional about centering community voice in their efforts. So I think there's a lot to learn from them. I think what we need to do as we take all of this work forward in our market is make it relevant to this place, right? It's not going to be the same 5 indicators that we need to move here, but how do we sort of take the sentiments of what made them effective and try to adapt that for a Philadelphia approach.
Nice. So building on that, Horace, an actual design-centered question that, Darrin, I'd love for you to also chime in on here is how might institutions from colleges to just any public institution to the private sector and all the ways the private sector exists, right? Because technically, right, the foundations are technically part of the private sector, right? So in general, how might they all need to reimagine listening as an act, right? Building on what Claire was just talking about, an act that is not just nice to have, but is a crucial ingredient to economic mobility planning and success for the region.
Now, I love that you brought up the point about just destigmatizing the poor. I think if we think historically, how we view people experiencing poverty has been so not only divisive but violent. With the dismantling of social safety nets, you see somebody that is in a totally different tax bracket than you already have this. Real quick question, anybody from Philly, like born and raised Philly? Okay, cool. Quick thought experiment? No, it's cool, because then you can tell your friends in the crowd who aren't. When we think of Central High School, okay? We think of completely opposite side of the city, Strawberry Mansion. Not opposite side, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like for those who are not from Philly, ask somebody from Philly, there are 2 different ideas of schools when we think of these 2 different schools. So destigmatizing the poor across every single institution, right? My specific role at CCP, again, I have students who are experiencing homelessness, who are experiencing high rates of poverty. But when you think of the Community College of Philadelphia, community college in and of itself, there is not a positive stigma with community college. But to everyone's point on the panel, there are people at CCP who want to be analysts, who want to be architects, who want to be engineers, who want to be like chefs, who want to enter these, and there are also students who are there for a certification and just want to enter the trade, who want to be mechanics, right? So destigmatizing the poor, I think, is the very first step in providing opportunity for these people who are just going through a rough spot in life to get ahead, right? And I think the other thing that we should focus on is, and this is really not unique to Philly, because I think every city does this, but like listening to not just Gen Z, but the younger generation. I think one of the things that Philly has historically done, and I think all urban cities have tried to do this thing, is to keep not only the middle class in the city, but keep everybody in the city. Because the more money you spend here, the more money we can start to build stuff with. But if I am 10 years old and I see my city is dirty, the education here isn't great, this isn't talking about Philly, I'm just talking hypothetically. But if I see the conditions, my living conditions across the board, not only at home, but outside, if I don't like it here, why would I stay, right? So there needs to be some type of investment into the voices of young people, highlighting these organizations that are doing great work. For example, off the top of my head, I think of Bold Philly, grassroots organizing organization that is taking students from West Philly High, Sayre, another school in North Philly, and another school in South Philly, I forget which ones, but they are allowing these students to put together community-run, grassroots organized projects to improve their community so that they have stake in their community. I think that's very different than I pride myself on being a researcher and an educator, right? Like, one of the things I pride myself on being is really boots on the ground. But I could also take several steps back and be in my ivory tower of being an academic, but nothing gets done there, right? So, I mean, destigmatizing poverty, but then also investing in the voices of young people. As I'm 23, going on 24. So eventually in 5 years, I'll be 30. Can I still call myself a young person? I'm going to. But eventually, like, I won't be a young person anymore. So then it becomes my responsibility to listen to the next group of young people. So yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
What I'll chime in there is that if us in white collar jobs and positions do not lift up blue collar jobs and positions and make it sexy again, we're going to have a struggle in our country and our side in the greater Philadelphia region. I'm hearing now, if you want to exchange or get a new hot water heater or get your HVAC work on, it's a month and a half, almost 2 months before someone can show up. And when they do show up, they can put the price tag on it that they choose to do, right? Our apprenticeship programs, right? Our CTEs at our schools need to come back with a vengeance, right? When we're on social media, we're always lifting up the economic success of doctors and lawyers and those in academia. We have to begin to lift up the economic success of those that are HVAC and that are electricians and those that are mechanics. There's not a day that goes by that we don't get a phone call from a company that says, hey, do you have a group of young people that are interested in becoming an apprentice? Right now, to become an elevator mechanic, they're paying $85,000 to $90,000. But if you don't want to work directly with a company per se, you might just want to get 2 or 3 of you to go into that apprentice, become an elevator mechanic, and build your own business. So now you can monopolize the city, and you have this opportunity to create your own business. You have your own ideologies. You have your own 9 to 5. Our younger generation want to work. They just want to work differently. And they've seen people work 9 to 5 all their lives and still struggle. It's like, if I'm going to struggle, I'm going to struggle my way versus struggling and being at your beck and call. We have to look at this much differently. We have to think about this in a tangible way, but we have to ask our young people who are feeling the impacts of society and policy, we have to ask them questions, bring them in, ask them questions, and allow them to speak.
Yeah. Okay, I want to add, just because I'm in that position, right? Like, this is my first big boy job, right? Getting my first salary, right? And it's paying tax. What? Jesus. But it really is, like, no one's asking me, right? Like, well, how do you want to do this thing? My parents we are solidly middle class, right? And I've been afforded the resources to know, okay, this is how I can move forward, right? I have that agency, I have that know-how. Working with students day to day, I can't even ask that question. Because sometimes they can't even imagine. Like, I have one student, I love him to death, but he wants to do those blue collar jobs.
Yes.
And I'm like I would have never guessed that was a thing. Young people want to work, like they want to work. But again, to your point, they want to work their way. I want to work my way. And I think it's lovely that you bring that up, because there's, again, so much stigma against Gen Z specifically, because you do have this subset of my generation who are so focused on being influencers, who are focused on, getting at the highest point, making the most money, but then completely ignoring that there are jobs that this city needs, that this nation needs, that are not going to be filled because no one's telling them about them. Please,
Precision manufacturing is a great example.
Right.
Those companies are saying, we could grow, but we can't find enough people to work on the floor in order to take on the next contract.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space. Hanwha is the new owner of the shipyard. They're planning on doubling, tripling their staff, some upwards of several thousand jobs in the next several years. Welders, we're talking about opportunities and how do we figure out in a systematic way how we can build knowledge and understanding and make those connections to employers who really are ready to welcome people and help them learn whatever that trade might be.
Yeah, I go back to the narrative piece around this because I'm always stunned with what we call smart or intelligent. Because I'm like, it's so contextual. You put me in front of a car that's broken down, I'm not smart. I'm not smart at all. And I will pay whatever I gotta pay to get that thing moving again. It's the same with the HVAC. I'm like, you can be an extortionist. I'm like, that's fine, because I want my heat on, and I don't know what I'm doing. And if I even try to tinker, I'm gonna probably give myself another $7,000 bill. So I love what you're talking about, because I think we're at the crux of trying to figure out this larger narrative. Prepping you up and coming back to you too. This larger narrative, but also to your point, Darrin, I think there's a narrative around business development that we don't talk about in the city, and that I would even argue sometimes there's opposition there. Right? Like being a young guy that was like, I'm gonna start a business. I thought people would be excited for me, and it was almost like, how dare you? How old are you? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I thought I was doing the American thing, right? So I think even to your point, there are these market opportunities that don't get spoken of as market opportunities in the language that people can fully hear it. Because if you come at them with regulations and X, Y, and Z, they're I don't even know what that is. And no entrepreneur knows what that is until you're in it and you have your lawyers or you got somebody around you to guide you through it, no matter what sector you're in. And so I just love the storytelling example that you gave there for people. And I hope you hear that and think about how you're messaging entrepreneurship to people who don't always see that as an option for themselves, even though they hear about it. Because both opportunities exist, to be a worker and make a great salary and get access to those benefits, et cetera, and this option to go into the market and create space for yourself, because the demand is there. So we got to be able to tell both stories and give pathways for both folks. Off my soapbox now. Back to you, Isaac.
The narratives around the types of work, I think, is a really important.
That is very important.
Absolutely.
So actually, that's the bit of the ending question before we open it up for some Q&A here. But not just types of work, but let's say one piece is around types of work, but really what are some new communication strategies and new narratives we might need to tell that can help us reimagine these pathways towards economic mobility? I was going to say in the city, but the nation counts, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think, not to push back on any of my co-panelists, but I think being afraid of new media types is not the way to be. I think what we're seeing right now is that influencers and creators the creator economy is really having a measurable impact on Gen Z and millennials and older generations. And if you're in any media space, that is what everybody is talking about right now, and is something that I think it's up and coming, and it's going to just continue to grow and grow and grow. And brands and agencies and everyone is looking to that. And I think what that also offers is creators and influencers offer something that's a bit more real life to someone than watching like a TV show. Being able to see yourself as somebody, seeing a creator that looks like you or comes from the same background as you or talks like you can have a really impactful way on feeling like, oh, this is something that I can pursue. So I think having, like, investing and looking to creators who are talking about these blue-collar jobs, who are talking about opportunities, who are talking about their life in lower socioeconomic statuses, I think that's really important. I also think in addition to narratives, one thing that I was also thinking about is a different Ross Chetty study from 2022 that said the #1 determinant of if a child who is in poverty is going to be able to make it out and change their economic status is economic connectedness, which is when a child, or I guess anyone, but mostly thinking about children because of the development, when they're around, if they're socioeconomically low, if they're only around other people from that same socioeconomic status, they're going to, that's not going to be very helpful. But and the same for people who are of higher economic statuses, like if you're just staying within your own groups, there's nothing's going to change. But the best way is having a mix of situations with people from different backgrounds. Not only does not hurt the people from the higher socioeconomic backgrounds, they still have the same outcomes, but I think it was something about if you have a low socioeconomic status and your friends or the people who surround you go from 50% to 25%, or 25% to 50% of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, your adult income raises by 20%. So I think that's a pretty large statistic, and I think when we're thinking about things that can help change this psychological aspect of poverty, I think being able to see other people in your own life who just live differently than you, I think it also creates more empathy, especially thinking about people from higher economic classes talking to people from lower, because I think having buy-in about the importance of economic mobility and economic inequality from people across the board is key. I think having just poor people who are living it and breathing it is, to solve this problem, I think is not the right way. I think policymakers, I think people who are running the business world, I think everyone needs to buy in and be able to invest in this idea. And I think as a person in the media, I think that's what I'm going back to, and I think maybe, in this stage, I can't change education policy in this moment, so I can't, make all classrooms less segregated, but what we can do is we can uplift voices and we can uplift narratives of people who are from different socioeconomic statuses, and I think finding ways, I just keep thinking about creators and the creator economy, and there are a lot of creators who are talking about, or there are certain creators that are talking about how do you make, a certain budget last for a big family, or how do you make a certain budget last for a longer period of time, and I think having somebody else who's lived it and breathed it is going to be the most impactful person to understand really what somebody is going through and to aid in that economic mobility.
Nice. Yeah, I'm going to underscore something that you just said. It's a power analysis, right? Because if we flip away from socioeconomic status and just were to talk about let's just go to the world of work, right? Is it a woman's job to fix the way a meeting runs, for example, where she is not listened to or heard, or is it actually those with power, the men in the room, who have a lot of deference given over to them to actually make space, to do something different? And I appreciated the power analysis you slipped in there, and I just wanted to lift it up because this whole thing is about free speech. And when we started planning for this, I said to John, I was like, mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know that there's a legal part here around free speech and economic mobility. But I think there's something so important and potent there that I'm super interested in what we can pull apart and ask. And John was totally with it, so hats off to John. But I think this power piece is a huge chunk of what's at the center of that energy around why economic mobility and free speech should probably be more of a conversation that we're all having regularly. So with that, so I want to clap it up for the panel, but I think we still have a couple of moments. We do have some time for Q&A if anyone has a question for our panelists. Yeah.
But just let me know if you can't hear me or not. So, great panel so far. There's been a lot of policies touched upon, and Horace, you were kind of alluding to it earlier. But one policy that might not be immediately obvious to people is the subject of affordable daycare. And so, we talk about daycare as a huge expense because it is, but I think one of the things that's not immediately clear for, I guess you could say, more conservative folk who might be against raising taxes to afford this is that it could be seen as an investment, because if people can have affordable daycare in their industries, that gives them more time to work, that gives them more time to increase their economic ability, and it is a barrier that is preventing people from working, as you laid out really well for us, being able, because they do have to balance working and getting education and taking care of their child. So I was wondering if any of you have any sense of what that kind of policy in progress looks like in the state of Pennsylvania, or perhaps what it looks like more locally in the city of Philadelphia.
I mean,
Does anyone need that repeated in the room? Could everyone generic? So, question about childcare related to essentially both economic development in terms of business growth and business sustainability, but also economic mobility and family sustainability, however people are defining family, right? Whether it's a single parent, household, one kid, multiple parents, multiple kids, whatever definition that is, but the relationship between the two, and like where's that policy progression potentially at for the state of Pennsylvania and the Commonwealth?
I mean, I can speak specifically to Philadelphia. A couple years ago, there was legislation introduced about the informally called the soda tax. It's really called the sugary beverage tax. So Mayor Jim Kenney, for those who are not from Philly, basically tax on sugary beverages partly go toward funding preschools for Philadelphia. People didn't love that. I loved it. People didn't love it because when you say, I'm going to tax your soda, I'm going to tax your drink, people only hear I'm taking more money from you. But what it ended up doing is it allowed funding for daycares, right, for preschools. And then the major political pushback from it was, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, because if you know more than me, it was like these bigger corporations were like, no, like we're not rocking with that. But like if you really think about it, why wouldn't you want kids to have an education? Our babies, why wouldn't you have the next generation have a little bit more money to have an education? But y'all probably know a little bit more than me about that one issue.
Yeah. I think some other policies is that we have to put more towards workforce development and career services, and more towards, I believe, justice-involved individuals. I mean, 45,000 people are being released from incarceration every year here in our region. And it's expensive to be successful. Let's just make it very clear. The affordability. So we have a program called the Urban Construction Jobs Program. And part of that program, we provide stipends for income. We cover childcare costs, transportation if they need food. If you don't remove those barriers, then more than likely you're not going to get their attention, because life happens, and when life is happening, it's very difficult to have that level of concentration. We received that grant. It's $500,000 in grant, but it's very little that comes from management and overhead for our organization. So we have to couple it with another program. And our goal is to try to reach out to 100 people, hopefully with 40 that will go into an apprenticeship program. But we have to have programming that gives the money directly to the program participants to alleviate a barrier so they can fully participate. And sometimes our government contracts and grants prohibit us from doing that. The money only can be used in a particular way. So we need more flexibility in the way that government dollars are flowing, but we also need for those resources to be used to remove barriers, because we know if we can remove those barriers to affordability, now we can begin to create this opportunity, or maybe just create a couple, at least a ladder for someone to move up the economic mobility ladder.
I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, particularly because the vast majority of workforce dollars come from the public systems, right? And there is, I think, a movement and a lot of interest, particularly from philanthropy, to be at the table to be able to provide some of that kind of flexibility, whether it's stipends or childcare housing.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of conversation going back to sort of how do we organize here around, let's grow more high quality jobs. Let's figure out how we better connect people to them, and how we think about, in a structural and scaled way, barrier removal, or sort of whether that's cost reduction in something that you have to purchase, or support for transportation because you're going to go to a job that's not connected to transit. We can talk about transit also, if you wanted to go down that path. But I think those are all sort of elements of how, at least it feels like, our community is going to try and respond, at least in this sort of first couple of years, to the challenges laid out in that report.
The only little piece I'd add is a complicator. We're trying to figure out childcare. About 2 months ago, I'm not endorsing HBR, by the Harvard Business Review, but I do subscribe, so I read it. About 2 months ago, there was a fantastic article in there about how, for the first time ever, there are more elders, adults, older adults, in care facilities or needing care facilities than children in daycare and preschool.
So barrier removal, in a general sense, is an important concept to hold, regardless of whether that's children, parents.
But the hard part is that this is newer information for so many people, because the article is about like, well, what are employers supposed to do? And I said, this is a great conversation. I don't have a clue. I don't have an answer. I don't have a thing. But it is a complicating factor that right now might not seem too big to people in the next 5 to 10 years as populations continue aging. And now, I remember being the 24-year-old, and this year I was like, oh, I'm the 40-year-old. I'm no longer the young person in the room, right? Like, as these things keep naturally happening, I think we're gonna have to do like deeper long-term investments. We might need to be looking at like bonding infrastructures of like the social impact bonds, where you're blending different types of capital and going for 20 to 30 years worth of a shot of changing very particular elements, but you're going for the capital that matches the need. I don't know that that's what we do in Pennsylvania at all. I mean, SEPTA, I think, is a great example. Somehow it's become like, well, Philly and SEPTA, and I'm like, well, SEPTA goes a lot of places. Like, how did this narrative become about one place? So I think our policies are kind of caught there, and we're all fighting through it together.
And in investments as well. I made this comment. I was speaking to my minister, my spiritual leader. I said, this world potentially going to come to an end with trillions of dollars sitting in endowments. We have all of these resources that are available for us to invest in communities, invest in people, and invest in futures. But we're saving those resources, like a sunshine fund because of a rainy day. And we could be doing more investment. If we actually invest, that will grow our GDP, right? And if we actually become more diverse, our GDP even grows more. So we have to think about our collective way that we're partnering together and making sure that we continue to center community, center voices, and center lived experience.
Good morning, my name is Keiser. I have a question in regards to what type of progress, from where each of you sit, what type of progress have you seen We talked a little bit about blue collar workers, right? What type of progress have we seen in regards to increasing access or entry into like unions, even completing apprenticeship? I know Darrin, you said a lot. You said that you all people doing a lot of work in regards to moving barriers for black and brown folks to complete apprenticeships. But what type of progress have you seen in terms of increasing black and brown people in that space, the union space?
Well, I would say systemically, Raj Chetty research told us very clearly we're not creating the right pathways. Individually, because of those that come into our program, we do see success, and sometimes it's an exception to the rule. At the end of the day, the policies, the economic opportunities, and this business development around economic community or community revitalization, whatever that may be, coin it any way you want to, it's not trickling down to the people. And because it's not trickling down to the people, people are not mobilizing themselves civically. They're not interested in voting. They're not interested in who's the candidates voting. The only thing they know is what's right in front of them. There's two ways I believe that we can begin to attack economic mobility or economic inclusion, or what we call participating in mainstream economy, is that we have to move people from from surviving to thriving. Right? Surviving, there is a grit that's part of that, and I talk about grit as a non-characteristic trait towards and helping someone to persevere through difficult times. But if they're just surviving, you're not going to get what you need. But if they're thriving, that's the difference. And I know that's what goes there in the middle is there's not a panacea, but it has to be real call to action and tangible and actionable outcomes that's going to get people there.
I think I do have that middle part. Community College of Philadelphia, I think what a lot of people don't know is if you go down to 46 and Market, right along the L, the campus, the West Philly campus that's right there, that whole building is basically devoted to trades. You have welding, you have car repair, industrial, like SEPTA bus repairs, right? I can't touch on the union piece that you asked about, which I think is a very important question, but I think the beginning of that is actually exposing people to this level of opportunity. That's an investment made by the city. Like, part of my salary is paid from Philadelphia taxpayers, right? So I think the best thing that Philly could have done was like, let's highlight this program, right? You can get a certification. You can enter this program, get 18 credits worth of classes. That's maybe a year and some change, and then you have access to the union. You have access to an entire field that, like we talked about, is untapped, right? So I think that maybe is that middle part of like exposure, but even then, some people look at CCP or look at these blue collar jobs, it's like, nah, that's not for me. When it really is, listen, like that building is beautiful. The professors there are phenomenal. They're real people who have been working these jobs for decades. And sometimes it's overshadowed because it's not traditional education, right? So I think that middle part, right? So I hopefully that kind of addresses that part. Yeah.
And if we don't, and getting to a point with my colleague here in the media, if we don't get someone from North Philly, from South Philly, from Germantown, from Mount Airy, from West Philly, with Jordans on and jewelry that says, I am an apprentice. And this is the work that I do. I am a welder. I work in constructions. I set my own schedule. If we do not market this, then early exposure is not happening. It's not, right? There's 3,000 jobs with the city. Yes, we can upscale their skills, but if they don't know that those jobs exist and they haven't necessarily even had the career assessment done within themselves to realize I have the ability. Sometimes I don't even know I have the ability to do these particular jobs. If we do not put this out on social media, we do not market it to our people, they're not going to know that it exists, and they don't think it's relevant to me. When was the last time I seen a black plumber on social media with my Jordans on and said, this is a career for you? We don't see it, we don't have it. So if they can't see it, they can't imagine it.
This is true. And Darrin made fun of me earlier because he was like, you got on a jacket and some shoes because I'm Jordans and jewelry all day. and I don't run from it. I think it's important that people, particularly because I love being an intellectual, but it just pushes you further and further away from people. And I'm like, no, I know exactly where I came from.
Right.
I know exactly who I still am in love with and have my community with. And I think there is a thing in Philly that breaks for people, where you have to disconnect from that world that is you to be in this fake corporate world that even a bunch of the people there that don't even look like me, that's not their normal world either. You know what I'm like? It is a fake old world that we're all participating in to an extent, and you have to make the choice to play that game or not. But I think there is something to be said about this energy. And again, I just name them 40 because I do come in with that energy of like, I've been lied to my whole life about what success was supposed to look like, what college was supposed to do, and now you're like, wear a suit. And I'm like, is that really going to do it? Right? So I think there is this good conversation happening that I just think I would encourage you to, and everyone in the room, to be a part of that and push on that conversation more and more, because it's a little bit of a charade, but at the same token, power dynamics. Right. Yeah, if I don't have the control in that room to be like, my suit don't matter, that's why I still own some of this stuff. You know what I mean?
And that's also why I wanted to talk about like social media, because I think it's really a vehicle for young people to be able to reclaim that power that they might not be able to get in the boardroom or wherever else. I think having more avenues for Gen Z and young people to be able to talk about the success that they're having or the struggles that they're having, I think that's going to just create more empathy in our society and get people to more understand what other people are going through. And also something that is aspirational, especially like so many young people, middle schoolers, high schoolers, are getting a lot of their information, their news from social media. So I think being able to not run against that or demonize people who are doing that, but instead work with it and work with the media and social media to find ways to promote these ways, promote the plumbers of the world. I think that's one of the best ways that we can shift that narrative.
Do you see influencers stepping into this space to learn more? Like, I'm thinking about the ones that have the huge platforms that don't talk like this, but are like, well, that's interesting. Is that happening?
Yeah, where's how do you connect to that potential solution?
So the way that I'm thinking about this is also something I see a lot in my job is brands are actually shifting from thinking about these huge macro influencers with millions of followers to actually micro influencers who have less than 100,000 or 50,000 followers who are just really come across as authentic, real people. So I don't think the ask is getting somebody who doesn't know about this space to learn about it. I think it's to finding the people that know about this, who are the plumber in Philadelphia already, and raising them up and giving them the resources to realize like people are interested in that narrative. I think people are really interested in various narratives. So I think what we can do is, if you're a Gen Z person listening, or if you're a young person, like, spread your voice. Like, people are interested, people want to hear from that, because, I think of, like, as someone Gen Z, like, I listen to a lot of people on social media, so I think not being afraid of, oh, I'm just young, I don't know that much, or I don't know how the world works. Like, I think your own perspective and your own story it's true, it's your own narrative, and I think owning that and talking about that and not shying away from that, I think is great. And I think, like, to the point that you were saying before, I think a lot of people might see people who are well-dressed and maybe they're not talking about the fact that they're getting it from being a plumber. So I think being able to own that and not shy away from that, which also goes back to the stigma around those sorts of blue-collar jobs, I think that's all really important.
Can I ask a question to that? So one of my guilty pleasures, and don't judge me.
Last question.
Right. Sometime I watch this show on YouTube, Pop the Balloon. Like, now, I've been married for 30 years. I married my college sweetheart. But the reason why I watch it, because I'm also adjunct faculty, I want to stay relevant to our younger generation, right? And sometimes when they come out there and they introduce themselves sometime as a content creator, as an influencer, they're in music, but yet some of them are sociologists. Some of them are psychologists. Some of them work for the State Department. They don't lead with that, right? They don't lead with the stability of their job. They're leading in a different way. Is that because those considered to be cool? They're considered to be relevant? Is it that's what's going to inspire someone to want to know more about you? That is just so interesting to me, you may have a dentist on there. Don't get me wrong. There's people that have other jobs and positions, but it's how you identify and how you lead. And is that making a difference in our society? I don't know, but I just find it very interesting for me.
You want the final?
I mean, it strikes me also that this is another one of these generational, like, the way someone identifies who they are isn't necessarily by their job,
Right.
Yes.
right? Like, there's more to you as a human than, right, like, I'm a mother, I'm
Well,
a sister, I'm a
and let's be honest,
wife,
what do we do?
I like these kinds of things, like, I think they're, I can't speak for the generation
But I'm 50
we're
years
talking
old,
about here.
and when people ask you what do you do, it's because we're trying to determine what's your social class.
And
Yeah.
Ken, do you have
Young
something
people
for
don't
me?
care about that.
No.
Heard.
Yeah,
I
it's
think we have to
definition
wrap up
of-
now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's a fantastic conversation.
It really was. This is fantastic. Thank you for that.
Do you have 30 seconds to give us a final answer to their question?
I think one point that I was trying to think is also, as your point, like Gen Z doesn't not want to work, or young people don't want to work. They just want to work in their own way or in a
Yep.
different way. So I think you're also seeing a lot of people who have multiple jobs, or they're an entrepreneur for themselves, and that might not have the same, social cadence as saying, I have this very strict job, or even I'm like a musician. Like, I think people are, like, a specific job might not have the same weight anymore, because I think jobs are becoming much more niche or changing, especially as like AI and technology increases. Like, the job market is just changing in what the world needs right now. There's a lot of low-level jobs that are not going to be needed. So I think identifying yourself with your job or your profession is just one part of the story.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
Can
you.
you please clap it up for this fantastic panel? Thank you. Thank you. You are now in the hands of John and the wonderful team at the Free Speech Project.